GitHub is in a very dire, a very bad situation. There are many, many problems, many of them related to AI, but maybe not for the reasons you think, but I'll get back to that. And of course, that matters. That matters because GitHub is the backbone of modern development work. No matter if you're doing open source development, if you're maintaining some open source projects, if you're working just on your own projects, your personal projects, your side projects, if you're running a small business, a small company, or maybe if you're in a bigger company, it's used for all kinds of things as a code archive, for CI/CD workflows, for collaboration, for working on projects together, through issues, through pull requests, and many, many other things and use cases. So that matters, but as mentioned, there are many, many problems. And let's start with what's wrong before we take a look at the why and what that means for the future. And let's start with a big one. There was a huge, an unbelievable security vulnerability reported yesterday when I'm recording this. A remote code execution on github.com. I mean, reading that is just insane. It was discovered by Wiz, a security company, and it was not exploited. So it was discovered, it was reported, it was fixed. No damage was done. According to GitHub, they also published an answer to this report. Now, I won't go into the details of how that vulnerability worked. I'll link the article below, though. But in the end, it all worked through git push. So no phishing involved, no account takeover of some employee, no supply chain attack. We've seen plenty of that stuff over the last weeks, but no, nothing like that was involved. Instead, it was just git push. And then specifically, the standard push option feature that you can add to the git push command to attach extra options to that push command. And through that options feature and a vulnerability in the way GitHub handled pushes, the security researchers here were able to attach code that would execute just like that on the GitHub servers. Now, again, the exact details are in this report, but in the end, they abused the fact that you could add extra metadata to an xstat header that would be populated with help of that push options flag. And that metadata, that information that you could pass along with the push request through that header in the end, was not sanitized by GitHub. They just authenticated the push request in the end, the push command. They checked if you are allowed to push to the repository you tried to push to, but then they took that options data and built that xstat header without sanitizing that data. And that allowed the security researchers to execute command that was then not restricted to the repository to which they pushed, but that instead freely ran on GitHub servers and was able to access other repositories as well, including private repositories. Now, again, this vulnerability was reported and was fixed, and it no longer exists. But it's a huge one, obviously. I mean, that is such a big deal. Having a vulnerability that allows for remote code execution on github.com, it's really huge. So yeah, that's a big one, but of course, it's not the only problem. On April the 23rd, so just a few days earlier, there was a huge incident related to GitHub merge queues. Now, GitHub merge queues, in case you don't know, is a GitHub feature that's meant to be used for repositories where you have a lot of activity, a lot of active work, a lot of pull requests coming in. And in order to make sure that you don't have to merge every pull request before a new one can be sent, because of course you want to have a pull request against the latest state of the repository, of the main branch, for example. In order to make sure that you don't have to merge every pull request before a new one can be opened in the end, this merge queue feature exists, which has the simple goal of effectively creating an intermediate merge already, of creating a new state of the repository, of the branch you are trying to merge against, for every pull request. And if a new pull request is added to the chain of pull requests, that is also already merged, combined with the pull requests in front of it into the main branch, so that new pull requests are opened as if the prior pull requests had already been merged. And that simply allows teams to work quicker because you can open more and more pull requests without having the ones in front of it first. At some point, of course, they will be merged, but it allows you to keep on working, which of course is important for big teams, for example. Now, what's also important related to that feature is, of course, that it works correctly. And what happened on April the 23rd was that there was an error, an internal logic error in how GitHub resolved these different pull requests, so that ultimately it would create a merge that would drop some information that would lead to an invalid commit and get rid of parts of the Git history there. Now, the data was not actually lost, but this feature worked incorrectly and produced that incorrect commit. That's the short version of it, the gist of it. And of course, also totally unacceptable if you're a big company or any company relying on that feature and suddenly your project ends up in a broken state without you having a clear explanation for it. That is unacceptable, of course. And your first thought, of course, is probably not that there is some internal bug in that merge queue feature. It's probably that you did something wrong. So you spend a lot of time searching for the error until you find out, oh no, it's GitHub. And that, of course, all comes in addition to the ongoing uptime, downtime issues GitHub has. Now, the official status page looks bad, but maybe okay. But we don't have 3 nines of uptime here either, at least for most systems. They do report uptime separately for different systems. But things look a bit different if we look at the missing GitHub status page, which tracks uptime in a different way and counts every small incident as a problem, as a downtime in the end. Here we have a horrible uptime for such a crucial system like GitHub. Totally unacceptable, of course. So we had uptime issues for the last months and even in the last year already, and there also have been smaller bugs here and there, just not as big as this one or as important as this security vulnerability. But yeah, there are many problems, and GitHub has definitely become a unreliable platform at this point, unfortunately, which is a disaster given its role and its importance in, as I said initially, modern development, no matter which kind of development work you're doing. Another problem is that communication from GitHub's side has been, let's say, not a lot. There hasn't been a lot of communication, but there has been a blog post shared on April 28th, before that security vulnerability, where they kind of explain what's going on, where the problems are coming from, that they understand that their communication strategy hasn't been ideal, and that things will get better. That's now the next part. Where are the problems coming from? The official statement here states AI as a reason, but not in the sense of GitHub engineers at Microsoft using AI and shipping broken software, broken updates to GitHub. That may be happening, but we have no proof for that. But instead, the main reason cited here is, of course, that because of AI, there are so many more projects being created, so much more code being generated, and ultimately all those projects and all that code being pushed to GitHub. And they share some, well, yeah, not super helpful, but they share some charts here. They're not super helpful because we have no y-axis. We don't see the absolute numbers, but of course we can see the relations here. And we can, of course, see that over 2025, there was a steep increase in pull requests merged, commits pushed, and of course also new repos being opened. That's all our side projects we're now creating and not finishing with AI. And then in 2026, obviously for all these metrics, the chart goes just skyrockets into, well, the sky, I guess. So yeah, that is of course a pretty clear trend, and This traffic, this kind of increase in traffic would of course put any system under stress. It's particularly problematic for GitHub because they are in the midst of migrating away from a monolithic structure and from their own dedicated data centers or systems into the Azure cloud and into a more broken up system, a microservices system, you could say, instead of that monolithic structure. That was an ongoing process before we entered 2026 already. But of course, it means that now this migration process is hit with that spike in demand, which means even though you're migrating, you have to kind of stabilize the current system while continuing the migration, which then hopefully will help with that increase in traffic in the future. That's the hope, of course, no guarantee. But of course, it is something GitHub has to deal with. Now, they're stating here that they started executing a plan to increase GitHub's capacity by 10x in October 2025. So you could say around here, they saw, well, this is all going up. I mean, they could see that from before already, but it's here where they decided we need to 10x our capacity. And then in February 2026, they saw, okay, we need 30x, not 10x, because of that development here, right? That, of course, must be done in addition to that migration. And that is a huge task, obviously. Now, it is part of Microsoft, so it's not some small startup, but nonetheless, it's a daunting task. And this is one aspect of this entire GitHub problem where I have some sympathy, because I think it's easy to hate on GitHub, to scoff at GitHub, and you definitely can, and I'll get back to more problems which are really bad. But this kind of traffic increase would be a huge problem for any system, for any company out there. And it's hard to believe that any GitHub competitor would do better in this situation. Still, of course, that's no excuse. It's part of Microsoft, and therefore they, of course, definitely have the resources to go through that transition and adjust their systems to this new world and to this new amount of traffic. But there is another important problem here with GitHub, and that is that it has no longer a CEO. The previous CEO, Thomas Domke, retired or stepped down or announced that he would step down in August 2025. And Microsoft did not assign a new CEO. Instead, GitHub became part of Core AI, an internal division at Microsoft that, as the name suggests, is all about AI and building AI tools and platforms. And GitHub is part of that. So clearly the mission of GitHub from Microsoft's perspective is to become part of that AI tool chain, of that AI revolution. And obviously Microsoft is pushing Copilot into all their products. And indeed at GitHub Universe 2023, they already said that they will transform GitHub into the AI-powered developer platform with GitHub everywhere. That includes stuff like new features that help with creating issues with GitHub Copilot, which is a huge problem for open source maintainers, but also just the pure presence of GitHub Copilot everywhere on GitHub. There is this Agent HQ thing here on GitHub, github.com/Copilot, where you can interact with GitHub Copilot and work on your code right from inside GitHub Copilot without ever opening up a local IDE or coding agent tool, and many, many more parts. GitHub Copilot is everywhere in GitHub, just like Copilot is everywhere in all Microsoft products, I guess. And that, of course, is a clear strategic decision, which kind of goes against the actual mission of GitHub, at least the mission GitHub had in the past. Because as I mentioned at the very beginning, GitHub is important for different kinds of developers for all kinds of use cases. Open source maintainers use it to have their source code there and collaborate with other maintainers and other contributors from the community. Issues are vital for detecting, well, issues and working on them. Pull requests are important for having other people contribute to the code base. Discussions can be great for discussing new features or directions of a repository or of a library, and so on. There are many features related here that help open source maintainers, or at least helped in the past. Other people are using GitHub just as a resource for hosting links or documents, like all these awesome repositories, awesome Go, awesome Rust, and so on, which you can use to easily find resources if you want to work with Go or Rust. I'm using GitHub also for hosting my course resources, like here for my Codex course, for example, and for many other courses as well. So you can even abuse GitHub as just a kind of a document storage. And then, of course, you can also use GitHub for CI/CD work. In a company, you may be using GitHub to, of course, have your source code there, to have your team members collaborate on that source code with pull requests and so on. And then, of course, GitHub very often is also part of the CI/CD pipeline, where a new push to the main branch, for example, triggers a CI/CD pipeline. That could be with help of GitHub Actions, though that product has its own problems. But of course, it could also be to trigger a CI/CD pipeline on any other CI/CD provider, not just GitHub Actions. So GitHub, of course, has a very important role for classic traditional development work. But of course, Microsoft decided that nope, it should become an AI-powered developer platform, not just a developer platform. And that, of course, is kind of a mismatch here. Developers don't necessarily want Copilot in every aspect of GitHub. I guess users of Microsoft products in general don't want GitHub in all their products, but that's a different story. And GitHub has been neglecting the core features that are important for developers. And I mean, take open source development work. Open source project maintainers are drowning in AI-generated issues and pull requests. Now, the problem here, of course, is asymmetry. It's easy to use AI to generate code or issues. It's way harder to review all that stuff. So to review that generated code and those generated issues. And I mean, that's something every developer knows who ever worked with AI. You can easily spin up 3 AI agents or more and have them work on your projects, totally outside of GitHub. You can do that on your machine with Codex, Cloud Code, and so on. But then if you're not going down the vibe coding route, which you shouldn't, in my opinion, you have to review that code at some point. And that takes time. And it's not a lot of fun, at least for me. Now, if you spin up 3 agents, you have to review the output of 3 agents. You can reduce the amount of agents if that's too much for you and you find that you're not really productive that way. Now, when you're an open source maintainer on GitHub, you're drowning in AI-generated issues and pull requests, and you therefore have 2 main options. You can ignore them, and that kind of defeats their purpose, of course, but it is a valid strategy, obviously. Or you try to work your way through them and you get burnt out because it's just too much. Because unlike with your own personal development work, you can't just reduce the amount of incoming issues and pull requests. You can use less agents on your own if you find that you're not effective or not productive with all the agents you're trying to run. You can't do that with the public repositories. You can't control how many people will post AI-generated issues or share pull requests with you. So that is a huge issue for open source maintainers, and why the entire open source scene and the philosophy behind open source is in huge problems right now because of AI. And GitHub is not helping with that. Instead, they're doing the opposite. They are actively making it easier for AI slop issues to be shared and so on. What maintainers and developers would need would be more effective tools for dealing with all these AI-generated issues and pull requests. But GitHub is not working on that. It's not part of their strategy, I guess. Now, maybe that will change. That official post by GitHub I mentioned earlier primarily talks about the reliability and uptime issues and that they want to be more transparent and so on. But they also mentioned that they have a commitment to support developers. We'll see. I'm not too positive because ultimately it's part of Microsoft and they have their very own strategy here. But what does this mean for GitHub then? Is it time to migrate away? I've heard some voices here and there on X that it's now time for a GitHub alternative. I know that some projects have migrated away. SIG is maybe the most prominent one. They migrated from GitHub to Codeberg in November 2025. But let's be realistic here. For one, as I mentioned before, the amount of traffic that's hitting GitHub would overwhelm any competitor as well, likely even more than GitHub because they're not part of Microsoft. So we definitely will not see GitHub being replaced. And while some individual projects, especially open source projects, may exit GitHub for reasons I can totally understand, all those companies, all those individual developers will likely not migrate away. GitHub has, despite all its issues, a feature-rich platform with features that are integral of many developers' workflows and day-to-day work. Especially for companies, of course, it's not easy for them to just replace GitHub with some other provider. Even though all the reliability issues are obviously huge issues for companies as well, they will be able and willing to endure a lot more pain before they would even consider moving away. I'm certain of that. GitHub is just too important of a platform. It's the platform for putting your Git managed code into the cloud and working on it and collaborating on it. So I'm sure it's not going anywhere. Even if the situation would get worse, of course, eventually people would leave if GitHub were not doing anything, but clearly they are, at least regarding the uptime and reliability issues. When it comes to open source work and the issues there and the AI slop issues, we'll see. Even there, I believe that GitHub is just too important and has too many advantages for open source maintainers to just leave, at least like all of them. But I definitely understand if individual projects move away from GitHub. So that may happen. But yeah, for companies and GitHub in general, it'll stick around. Nonetheless, one can only hope that this situation here is maybe a wake-up call for Microsoft. Maybe they'll put a CEO back in charge for GitHub. They maybe understand its importance. They maybe understand that it's a developer and development platform, not primarily an AI platform. But yeah, one can hope. I don't know if and when that will happen. But yeah, that is the current GitHub situation. It's bad. It's really bad. And it will stay bad for the near future. But at least the reliability will hopefully get better later this year. We'll see, I guess.